Hey everybody, glad you were sitting in a circle today instead of a row. I love speaking to rows, but really discipleship does best take place in circles. And so glad you're here to begin a study in an exciting book called Esther. Esther is an incredible story. It's an incredible story that has so many wonderful truths about it, and we're going to unpack those truths kind of week by week. But the one we're starting with today, I think it's very practical. Has there ever been a time in your life when it seems like you can't sense or see God's presence? You can't see God at work? Has there ever been a time when you actually have wondered, where is God? Or is God anywhere around? Or does God care about what I'm going through right now? Sometimes we have a hard time seeing God. It is hard to see God. Sometimes it's because of distractions, and sometimes it's because we're too busy. Sometimes it's because we're not looking. Sometimes we can't see God at work because life itself has us so battered and beaten that we can't see, like a boxer's eye. We can't see out of it and swollen up too much. I don't know, but I'm pretty sure if you went around the room tonight, each of us would have a story of a moment when we wondered, where is God? Well, God truly is at work in our lives, and we're going to see that through this book of Esther. The glaring truth that we're going to look at this week, the big idea that we're looking at, I believe is so critical, and it is this: it just so happens never just happens. We use that phrase a lot, don't we? It just so happens. It just so happens that that's my name too. It just so happens that I'm going that way. But it just so happens really never just happens. Truth of the matter is, God is at work all around us, and God is moving in our lives for our good. Romans 8:28 is a verse that most of us can quote. If we've been in the church very long, if we've been in the Bible very long, you have run across this verse, right? That verse that says, "For we know that all things are working together for good to those who love God and are called according to his purpose." Surely that verse does have some qualification. It is talking to the child of God. It is talking about a person who loves God, a person who is pursuing that relationship, and that God is pursuing, and we know that. But here's the point. God is at work in our lives, and it just so happens, never just happens. God is at work, even in the little details of life. Now, Esther, I believe, is a long-running illustration of the truth of that verse. Because Esther and her life and her ministry and what she's about shows us God at work in the smallest little detail. The interesting thing about Esther is the name of God is never mentioned. As a matter of fact, some scholarship has decided that it shouldn't even be in the canon of scriptures since God's name isn't mentioned. The truth of the matter is, as some preachers and teachers of old have said, while God's name is never mentioned, his fingerprint is on every page. And that is so true. Even the little details of life. Very, very important. But now, while God's name is not mentioned, there are other names that are mentioned. There are other characters that come to life. Characters that can be verified with history, dates that can be historically put together. We know this is not a fable. We know this is not a story. We know this is not an epic tale. This is history. In fact, we see that the book starts off with a historical account. It starts off by talking to us about a real person and a real place at a real time. In fact, in chapter 1 of Esther 1, we read these words: "These events took place during the days of Ahasuerus, who ruled 127 provinces from India to Cush." That's the way the book starts. It may seem insignificant, but very significant. It tells us that this is not a tale. It's not an allegory. This is a true time. Ahasuerus. Well, we've kind of joked with our communicators that we probably need to come up with a pronunciation guide for this particular book because the names in it are a little difficult to understand or even to say. Ahasuerus. That's the king. That's the Hebrew name for the Persian king Xerxes, or Xerxes, however you want to say it. Here's my point in mentioning that. Throughout your small group time, don't worry, don't trip over the pronunciation of the names. That's not nearly as important as a discovery of the truth. We'll pronounce it the best we can, and we'll say it the closest we can to what we think is right. But the more important thing is to follow the truth. King Xerxes is in power. It's during his reign. The story occurs in Persia, not in Israel. And then there's other names like Vashti, the queen, and Mordecai, the Hebrew relative of Esther, who is the heroine of the story. All these names are important, and they're important to look at. Don't stumble over them. So I would encourage you to look through the first 3 chapters tonight. Look at those historical events that set up the story. These first chapters set up the story of Esther. And in even these early chapters, begin to see it just so happens. For example, it just so happened that the king decided to throw a feast for his friends. It just so happened that Vashti the queen took a stand against the king. It just so happened that Esther was in that province, in that place at that time. It just so happened that she's a beautiful young Hebrew woman. It just so happened that Mordecai heard the story of the plot to kill the king. It just so happened that he was in the right place at the right time. It just so happened, right? No. All evidence of God at work. And by the end, we will see that it just so happens never just happened. God was in complete control, whether we can see it or not, whether the circumstances reveal it or not. In fact, our takeaway is this, and a good part for you to discuss tonight. Are you allowing circumstance to dictate your perception of God? Are you allowing the circumstances of life, the difficulties, the good times, the hard times, wherever you're at right now in whatever season, are you letting those circumstances dictate your perception of God? What we learn from Esther is God never changes. He never changes, and he's always there, whether we can see him or not. And so he is working all things together for our good to those who love God and are called to his purpose. It just so happens, never just happens. Hey, have a great study tonight. Talk these things through. Got some questions for you, and enjoy your time together.